Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Lacey Kempinski to talk about parental leave. Lacey, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Alex. And also thanks for kind of insinuating that I'm a superhero. I don't feel like I fit the bucket because I have three kids at home that love Marvel and wear capes and all of those things. I don't wear a cape, but I am excited to talk about parental leaves with you today.
Not all superheroes wear capes,
Yeah, exactly.
but I actually do like starting the show by asking you, what is your superhero origin story?
Yeah, I love that. So I have a background in fundraising. I was an in-house fundraiser for about 10 years. And what happened was that I had a family. And so I mentioned that I have three young kids. So after my second son was born, I very quickly realized that the fundraising professional I wanted to be and the parent I wanted to be, those two things didn't align. I think we have a sector, a wonderful, beautiful, messy nonprofit sector that loves things like after hour meetings, board meetings, and your standard 40-hour work week can very quickly turn into a 50-hour work week. There's this culture of martyrdom, and we're always so busy. And that coupled with me wanting to be a very present parent after a couple of years of infertility struggles, I just knew those two things couldn't work together. So after my second son, I decided to start Balance Good. First off, it was to kind of help leaders, oftentimes women leaders, since the large portion of our sector is women, find a little bit of balance in their workload and me find balance in my workload. What happened then was that we really quickly learned that parental leave was a huge gap in our sector in terms of how nonprofits support parental leaves, how nonprofits backfill parental leaves, how the work gets covered when somebody goes on parental leave. So we were able to niche down and serve a market that hadn't quite been served. So that was almost 6 years ago now. Now we are a team of 7 and continuing to grow. We cover not just fundraising-based parental leaves, but we cover parental leaves in a variety of roles throughout the nonprofit sector, and we've covered parental leaves in Canada and the US. So really excited kind of that is my superhero journey. And I would say just like that, I'm excited to be able to show up for working parents in the nonprofit sector to hopefully strengthen our sector and reduce turnover and burnout.
I love the company name Balance Good. There's something very soothing about it to know that it's not just good for goodness sake. It has to be balanced with something. And I was curious if you could just spend a minute, like, is that what was the intention? Was the balance kind of like the work-life balance? Is it life? Is it another type of balance? Like what was the where does that balanced word, how did it come from? Like where's its origin?
I love that. Yeah. I think initially it was around this piece around work-life balance. And I think that was maybe a young and naive me realizing, like thinking that you could balance it all, that you could balance kids and a career. I very quickly realized that it's not quite balanced, but maybe blended chaos. And some days you're really, really strong at showing up for your career, and other days you're really strong at showing up as a parent. But often you're not strong at showing up at both on the same days, and that's okay. But then I think, as time evolved, this idea of balanced good is also in how we approach things in our sector, just from, a standpoint of balancing the needs of your employees with the needs of your mission and moving your mission forward. So making sure that the people in your organization doing the work are equally prioritized, and that prioritization is balanced amongst your mission and the work that you're doing. Because if you burn out the team members doing the work, you're not going to be able to achieve your mission or move your mission forward.
When I think of the word balance, though, the picture that usually comes to mind is either a seesaw or a scale, where you've got two things on opposite ends of each other. And the more you have of one, the less you have of the other. And the balance is where you're equal, right? Each side has the same amount or mass, and then therefore you're balanced. When we talk about work-life balance, that to me means that work and life are at odds by definition with each other. That you can, if you have more of one, you have to have less of the other. I want to challenge that for just a second.
Hmm.
I'm of the mind of when you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And I see it as this is my life. Yes, there are some moments that I'm focused more on the work side of things versus non-work type of things. But I try, at least for myself, not to see it as that things that being at odds of each other. They're more complementary, if that makes. And I was curious if you have, the question is, what are your thoughts about that? And well, let's start there. What are your thoughts about what I
Yeah.
just said?
Totally. So, something I talk a lot about and feel very passionate about is this idea of work life integration. So, again, like I said, when I first named Balance Good, there was like this naivety in me that, like, oh, we can balance it all and we can't. But oftentimes we see that we're up against the structure that's trying to make you balance things. Where if we better integrate our personal lives into our day-to-day work and our work lives into our day-to-day personal lives, things can be a lot smoother, especially when we are in a sector of caring, of empathy, of kindness. Like, I want my family to be integrated into the work that I do. I want my personal life to be integrated. Like, I volunteer outside of the work that I do because I'm excited about that and I want to build, stronger communities. Um, so there's this balance, and it can be just something as tangible and as easy as, creating spaces in our work where we can put personal things in our work day. And then we need to stop thinking about work as a 9 to 5 construct, but thinking about it as what needs to get done to move the mission forward. And I think like that is happening in some spaces and slowly, but just simple things like I always include like my kids bus drop off and pick up times because I can't be in two places at once. I can't be at a meeting and picking my kids up from the bus. So it's just having, realistic boundaries and being transparent that you're not just Lacey the worker bee or Lacey the mom. These two things happen at the same time.
I much prefer the word integration over balance because that to
Mm-hmm.
me implies a way of coexisting in balance, I guess is another way to say it, but let's not use the word balance because I defined it differently. It's integration
Mm-hmm.
between two facets of your personality, of your life, that when together they just paint the bigger picture and the picture of your life. So, and I love that expression about 9 to 5. It should not be about 9 to 5. It's about what needs to get done to move the mission forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think luckily is one of the outcomes, the positive outcomes of the pandemic is that structured work 9 to 5 in the office type work has definitely been challenged and altered completely so that more people are obviously working remotely. But I also think that, at least in my case, I've seen situations where it's not typical 9 to 5. It's basically whenever you can and want to a certain extent, work. And that might be from 6 to 5 or 6 to 8, and then take a break for 6 hours and then continue again. Like there's no, as long as you're there, like you said, for meetings, making sure that you're present for that, how you work, when you work, and to a certain extent where you work is almost, I would like to see irrelevant. And it's more about,
Mm-hmm.
are we actually moving the mission forward?
100%. I mean, I think we can all relate to that. Like, there are certain times in the day I'm more creative, and I know that that's when I'm going to do my creative writing. There are certain days, times of the day where, I'm really focused and can get that, like, just the check marks off the list of those easy tasks that need to get done. So I think embracing that and providing people with autonomy in your organization is really like one of the key markers to helping reduce burnout and turnover in our sector.
So let's talk a bit more about then parental leave, because that's a specific element of the balance or the integration.
Mhm.
I know that at least in the US, I get the impression, because I'm Canadian, I get the impression that it's all work and no play. I know, what was her name? The Yahoo president, CEO a few years ago was almost commended for taking like 2 weeks, having a child and returning to work, like, which in Canada is, we get a year of paid leave for mothers. And even it's popular for parents, for fathers rather, to take some leave as well. There definitely seems to be more attention and more support for women and men in Canada, parents, to be able to take time to raise their child and then maybe return to work. Versus the U.S. is like, no, no, no. If you're not, you got to pop the kid out in 2 hours, be back in the office kind of concept. So, um, I was hoping we could start the conversation by saying, is my perception from your experience semi-accurate? And if so, like, why is the US so focused on this that the parental leave becomes almost like a bad word?
Oof. Yeah, that's a big question. I think that there's like a lot of systemic pieces at play there. I think it's, in the US, there's a lot of political pieces around parental leave and access to parental leave, and it does vary state by state over who has access. And then it varies by employer. I think, unfortunately, the nonprofit sector, because we're the sector of limited resources, you often don't see like these paid top ups or extended parental leaves where some organizations, larger organizations, for profits offer some of their American-based employees. So perhaps they would get 6 months paid leave. In the not-profit sector, that is harder to come by. So you have parents that are taking 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and I have seen, and we have supported some longer leaves as well in the States. Like you said, in Canada, there's this, we're lucky that we have 12 to 18 months of parental leave, and there's flexibility in that, and who can take the leave, depending on if you're the birthing parent or the non-birthing parent, all of these factors. But I think regardless of the length of leave, there's this element that it comes down to that there's work to be done when somebody's on parental leave, right? So when somebody from your organization steps away from their career to focus on their family, that whole role needs to be covered, regardless of the time that they're gone from the office. And if we fail to look at how we're going to support that work, what's going to happen likely is that there's going to be further resentment on the team because now they're picking up slack from a coworker who's off. Or, it's just that you're adding to plates that are already full, and it's just another recipe for burnout for our organizations. And then we're not able to, again, move the mission forward.
Mm. Yeah, I understand there's a gap in people in ability to work, and you kind of have to fill that gap. And I know that's a whole conversation in itself, how to do that effectively. But it's I guess I'm trying to understand a bit more about the mindset. I mean, is it just because is it a capitalistic mindset in the US? Because if you know the mindset, if you know where, like you said, it's maybe a larger problem and it's hard to attack in this conversation at least. But I just want to try to get a baseline understanding of what would it take, I guess, to start breaking that and offering more and doing more. Like, is it a holistic type of situation where you have to probably attack multiple things at the same time? Or do you think there's a possible change, maybe at the ground level, grassroots, and work its way up and become more popular?
I think, personally, I think that there's like, when you're trying to make these large systemic changes, things need to happen together, right? So there has to be grassroots change and grassroots kind of awareness and momentum and movement building, but then there still has to be support from a systemic side of things, in terms of change. So I think in terms of why it's like this, I think there definitely is an element of capitalism at play. I also think that there's different taxation systems, right? So in Canada, the federal government has determined that parental leaves are a priority, and as taxpayers, we pay into that to provide employment benefits, or for people who are off on parental leave, where in some states there are these kind of methods, and I'm not going to say I'm an expert in terms of state by state and what parental leave looks like in the states, but it's just like two totally different government structures and how they do things and how they support working parents. I also think that there's like this values shift too on how we value parents and family in our communities, in our countries, in our lives, right? And when we look at supporting parental leaves and creating supportive parental leaves and just creating the structure of parental leaves, we have to look at like, how do we value like the growth of our population? How do we value the growth of our families and, the future generations in our society?
Let's then start at the grassroots because that's, I think, where we have individuals a little more leverage. And then that's also where you come into play too, in the sense of how you help nonprofits. Let's say, for example, you are approached by a nonprofit who is looking to support or to offer a better parental leave program or to do it more efficiently. Like, what are your typical challenges when you come into that, or what is the typical mindset you have when you start working with a client that has started to prioritize parental leave?
Yeah. So for us, for Balance Good, so just to backtrack a little bit, one of the main services that we offer is covering parental leave. So we come into the organization, we get to know the parent going on leave, we get to know their scope of work, their role, and then for the next 4, 6, 12, 18 months, one of the team members at Balance Good, and really the whole team at Balance Good, supports that role and priorities and deliverables related to that role, and we get the work done. But then we also provide return to work support so we can transition that parent back to work in like a very thoughtful way. And we provide kind of feedback to the employer, like, this is how we're going to create and make this role more working parent friendly. So, just things like suggesting that we focus on higher return on investment activities. So we're not just filling our plates with busy work, but that we're filling our plates with meaningful work that's, moving towards the overall goals of the organization. So in terms of like challenges, when we kind of start working with an organization or when an organization wants to work with us, I think one of the first challenges we always hear, and I feel like most consultants, most nonprofits will like nod their head yes at this, is price and cost and, investing in our services. And to that, I always talk about, the return on investment, but also the cost of not backfilling that role. So you're potentially burning out other team members. You're giving a message to the team member going on leave that maybe their work doesn't need to be done or that it's undervalued. And then you're risking that person doesn't return back to work. And the cost of having somebody not return back to work, the cost of transition, the cost of recruitment, the cost of filling a role again is much higher than the cost of backfilling a role. And so often, we say when we think about this and we talk about it in a nonprofit space, we talk about how do we pitch this to the board of directors? How do we get kind of like that board buy-in, that investing in parental leave coverage, investing in thoughtful parental leaves is a critical element of like your HR strategy and your people equity and culture strategy. It's talking about how this cost can actually mitigate other costs down the road as it relates to employee transition and help support employee retention.
I love that perspective. I mean, if you can show that messaging of saying, look, there's a cost here, there's a cost there. This, if we do offer proper support, it's actually going to be a better return than if we have to go the other direction. And that's just financial, of course. The other side is the whole emotional part. Like if you, I can't imagine someone who leaves to go to parental leave and then feels like their job is not as meaningful because either they didn't replace her in any way or put them in any way, and or struggles to like. There must be a lot of mental challenges to support there too. So it is a great way to present the case for proper parental leave. So you said you normally, or it's common for you to staff that gap, or is it you're helping the organization fill the gap themselves?
So no, typically we fill the gap. So oftentimes nonprofits will come to us because maybe they couldn't hire in the traditional route. So they put the posting up, but it is a temporary short-term posting, whether again, it's 4, 6, 12, 18 months. So they're not getting the candidates that they need, or they were able to backfill it, but then that person leaves because oftentimes they'll find a permanent role. And so they leave. It's just like the type of work parental leave coverage is like it's a little bit precarious, right? Because it really is short term, especially when we look at mid-level to senior roles. Junior roles, parental leaves can actually be a great entryway for more junior team members to kind of enter the sector or move up a little bit or try a new role. But when we look at mid-level or senior level roles, it's really, really challenging to bring somebody in to find that right person for that time period, that temporary time period. So that's often the types of roles we cover.
Yeah, that makes total sense, especially if your team has knowledge. They're more drag and drop. Not necessarily to say that all nonprofits are the same, but they do tend to have similar struggles and challenges. So when your team is ready to go and they're known to be good at this drag and drop 6 months, 9 months type situation, that's definitely probably much easier than trying to find someone senior for just that short amount of time. So those are a few ways we can start at the grassroots level. You know, you're helping people, helping organizations fill those roles, which makes total sense because it's more drag and drop, plug and play. And then once I was going to say once those needs are taken care of, but once you fill in the gap and you're able to address some of the challenges at least of these grassroots movements, how do you promote this change to work its way upward? Advocacy or any other programs or ideas, or like how do you get that change to then circulate and become more systemic?
Yeah, that question is one that's always driving our work at Balance Good, because I think sometimes like we started with filling one parental leave and now we've filled a couple dozen, and so yeah, that feels impactful, but that's really not changing the landscape of the sector, right?
Right.
So now we're starting to dabble our toes into advocacy work, and how can we look at creating maybe parental leave benefits for the sector. How can we partner with organizations that are already doing that and creating pooled parental leaves? Like there's so much opportunity here, and it can't just be done by one organization and with one voice. Like there has to be this collective effort. And then there's advocacy work, and things that we want to support. So things like making sure that nonprofit employees have access to quality childcare, so they can return to work and return to work in a thoughtful way. Advocating for employment insurance reform in Canada, so we're not just providing parental leave coverage for the birthing parent, or we're not providing different experiences for parents who become parents through adoption versus biologically birthing a child, because we now know like there's so many ways families start. So there's so many avenues that and like systemic changes that need to happen. And we're excited to start showing up in this space of advocacy. So it's like we're trying to do this advocacy work while also recognizing that parental leaves are going to continue to happen, and we want to continue to support them. So more and more people can talk about the impact that makes.
I was wondering if you could share a specific example for the advocacy, because I imagine this is like a huge challenge to try to get around or to change. Again, how do you move a boulder with a couple of people? Like, is it a matter of, and I'm going to be very specific, is that, education? Is it like webinars? Is it about going to different organizations and having them raise their voices to their elected officials? Like, if you can give, one or two ideas of how this can actually be done.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything, all at the same time, which, isn't easy. But I think it is certainly raising, those questions and concerns to elected officials. There's often different campaigns going on in our sector that are asking, the government to better support childcare, access to childcare, especially there's a lot of childcare providers that are nonprofits themselves. So really, supporting that system to then support nonprofit employees. I think it's looking at some of the larger organizations in our sector. So like a shout out to like the Ontario Nonprofit Network or Imagine Canada, who are doing a lot of this work. And then, Balance Good, again, like looking at webinars, looking at hosting just spaces for conversations about this, so we can get an understanding from our sector what really matters to the people that are in the sector.
It makes total sense. And this is such an important, at least in my opinion, an important topic that I'm really hoping slowly, eventually we'll get there to that it becomes a priority, because it's unfair, in my opinion, for people to have to choose between wanting to be a parent and wanting to have a career. There must be a way to find a way to integrate those two facets of your life so that you don't have to sacrifice one just to have the other and to have the support, when you're away and when you come back, to be able to do all of that. Because I've seen it done. People around me have done that, and I see the quality of their life and the quality of their child's life too, right? Versus I've got the impression that certain people who are so focused on their career and not neglect, but not even deprioritize, but focus on their career. Let's just focus on that one. That
Hmm.
they wish they almost had more support. So I'm sure it's a very, very tough cause to fight for, but it's a worthy one.
Yeah, and I just think like every single day I'm reminded that like we are creating the future generation of
Exactly.
nonprofit change makers, right? So, for me, it's really easy to see that because I have three young kids at home. But even for non-parents to see like there's a critical role in, including these children, making sure that working parents can be in the sector. So we're inspiring that future generation to continue pushing forward on our missions and the important work that we're doing.
I guess it's partly because I'm partial to this whole experience because my mom was fortunate enough to be able to stop working until I was in my high school years, basically. And just the childhood that I had, I wish everyone had, kind of thing. That support, the love, the affection every day. Um, that to me, I think is where this. I'm not struggling, but I'm definitely a bit more emotional about this topic than others because of that connection. And again, I wish everyone had that kind of experience and it could have that experience. So. That's the why.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I mean, that's the thing is if we can create workplaces that kind of can allow parents to show up a little bit more for their kids, because, just an example, like tomorrow I get to go hiking with my daughter's kindergarten class, right? But that's because I had to create a work environment that really supported that. And we're seeing it more and more, but we need to continue to push for what we just talked about, which is this work like life integration. We can't just have these two separate roles.
Shifting a bit from parental leave to overall mental health, I was wondering because we talked a bit about you mentioned burnout at one point, and I was curious to know, like, is that a topic you typically address as well as part of this whole service offering you offer and parental leave in general, or is it something that is connected but you don't really deal with it? And I'm hoping you do deal with it, so I can ask the question of,
Mm.
how do you address, or how would you like to see burnout or imminent burnout addressed?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we realized as we began working more and more with working parents, and just in the space of the nonprofit sector, is that burnout is pretty common. And we have a lot of incredible people leaving our sector or having to step away from our sector to recharge themselves, which one I would fully, if you need to do that, I would fully encourage you to do that. But again, it's this like system shift. Like, how do we create a sector that's better for the people that are working in it? So some of the work that we do really focuses around, like, I guess, assessing and auditing organizations as it comes down to their fundraising program or how they do operations and how they do things, so we can, recommend improvements so the organization can function more efficiently, effectively, and really focus on the higher ROI activities, so higher return on investment activities. So people aren't just doing busy work. We see that a lot in our sector, because it's this, like, I think this culture of martyrdom, like, we'll have to do everything I can to help, but there's actually a lot of things we can take off plates, that really aren't moving us forward effectively and efficiently. So we love coming in and, assessing an organization, for example, assessing an organization's fundraising plan and program, holistically, and saying, what, we can remove some of these things and have, your team members focus more on this, and you're actually going to have better fundraising results, and you're going to have a team that's not nearly as burnt out. And then we can help kind of coach organizations through that.
Are there anything, because that sounds like the organization taking surveys or getting feedback from people to make sure that they don't burn out themselves. But I'm curious to know, is there anything that the individuals can do, should do to be aware of the warning signs, lack of sleep or stress, or that they should start paying attention to, or at least be aware of, so that if they do see these signs, they can start making the necessary changes to reduce or the possibility of a burnout.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in this area, but I think that there's this general sense of like, if you feel like you have like apathy towards work, like you have no joy, you have no excitement, you have no feelings about the work that you're doing, I would say that that's definitely a red flag. If you're dreading going to work, um, that would be another sign or concern. So I think if you're having these feelings, one, I would say like probably reach out to a healthcare professional, but also look at how you can make some shifts in your life as it comes to work. So some of the first things we suggest when we're working with people would be like setting really clear boundaries, like you only work these hours, or that these are things that you will say no to because you have to protect your mental health. But then I also think it's about having realistic expectations of your time. And I see too many organizations saying, well, we raised 5 million this year, we have to raise 6 next year. But if we don't actually have the time, the resources, the skills to do that, it's not going to happen. So, something as simple as blocking your time in your calendar and really understanding how much time it takes to do specific tasks related to your role really helps when it comes to creating realistic workloads.
Yeah, those are fantastic. Boundaries, setting boundaries, saying no, which I think is a very powerful, and it's not a
Mm-hmm.
word that people like saying generally, but I think it's extremely not just powerful, but necessary word to say, because you do need to respect your own boundaries. We are still human after all. We have to
Mm-hmm.
understand that we just can't say yes to everything. And then um, I was going to say that third one, realistic goals. Absolutely. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
one thing to say be aspirational and say, we're going to double our fundraising this year, but if you don't actually have a plan to get there, it's just going to induce a lot of stress.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of organizations that we start to work with that they don't even really have a clear understanding of, like, maybe they have a fundraising plan, but they don't actually have the time outlined on how long it's going to take to do some of these things. And so it can be as granular as working like week to week to understand how you're going to get to your goals. And then you'll see, okay, these are the 5 things we need to focus on. If we focus on all 10, we're just going to burn ourselves out and we're not going to do anything effectively or efficiently.
So one question I also like to ask in that superhero vein is that if you had a superhero, if you had a superpower or a magic wand, and you could change something in the space of parental leave or burnout or mental health in general, what would that be?
Hmm. I'll say, can I be like the fairy of grace? So just giving yourself grace and giving others grace as we navigate this. Like, I probably could say something that is more profound and would change things quickly, but the reality is that's probably not going to happen. But if we give ourselves grace and those around us grace, everything becomes a little bit better, a little bit easier. So I guess that would be just my superhero power, would be to just sprinkle grace.
That's wonderful. There's no wrong answer to that question. It's. I think grace is a beautiful thing. That is definitely a word that we don't use often enough in our language, but I think it is lovely. It's necessary. So great choice.
Thank
Um,
you.
in terms of programs you offer, I was wondering if you could share. So I know you more specifically about Balance Good. You mentioned being able to allocate people for parental leave for short periods of time, especially in the mid to higher range. Any other training kind of programs or courses you give, or what other ways are you able to support nonprofits in this domain?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is covering interim staffing gaps, specifically related to parental leave, but we have covered gaps related to, say, sick leave or family caregiver leave, stuff like that. And then providing these kind of assessments of your organization in terms of like, how are we doing things effectively and efficiently? How can we do things more effectively and efficiently, helping build out fundraising programs or helping build out like operational plans that, focus on efficiency and helping reduce burnout and turnover. I always get those two mixed up. So I think that's like our 2 key offerings. We do offer some, webinars and different things like that, but honestly, we're pretty busy getting in the weeds with our clients and doing the work that needs to be done. And then, like I said, we're kind of dipping our toe into advocacy work, which we're really excited about too.
You're the only organization that does this. So I'm really happy that you're on the show and that you're sharing this because I think there needs to be more of you. Not that I'm trying to introduce competition for you, but the idea
No,
of
that's okay. Abundance mindset.
abundance mindset, absolutely. So, how can you? I'm hopefully there will be some people here listening who would love to get in touch with you to learn more about you and your programs, your services. So, how can they reach out to you?
Yes, I'm always available on LinkedIn at Lacey Kempinski. We also have our Balance Good LinkedIn page, which we share lots of resources, tips, great conversation there. Our website, balancegood.com. We're also on Instagram at balancegood, or you can reach out by email. I'm always happy to chat with people who want to chat about all things parental leave.
Lacey, listen, thank you so much for what you do. It's such an important, again, I was a bit more emotional on this episode than I have in the past because I don't know why there's a mental image I kept on rehashing in my brain, but very, very thankful that you do what you do. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much, Alex. I really appreciated our conversation.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.